Senator Cadell.
Reading in the papers, and the Minister, I've just got a copy of the release now, issued an announcement regarding the universal outdoor mobile obligation.
Yep.
I'm trying to get up to speed to it as quickly as I can as I read through it. Obvious thing, it says that will require mobile carriers to provide access to mobile voice and SMS almost everywhere across Australia. Almost. What is there a definition of? I imagine if this is Leo's, then it's everywhere. Is he almost just a get out of jail free card?
So, Senator Kell, thanks for the question, and I will ask the officials to talk through the technical detail that you've requested. But I think it is worth making the point that this is a very significant reform from a telco perspective. So I think Australians will know that it's, there's long been a universal service obligation in relation to terrestrial services. That needed to be brought up to date. Telecommunications technology has changed enormously. The government has done a very significant amount of work, and Minister Rowland, as you've noted, is wanting to progress this because of the significance of these issues for Australians, particularly in remote and regional communities. I'd make the point also, just in terms of my other obligations as Emergency Management Minister, that it's a really significant decision in terms of ensuring connectivity in a much broader range of places and circumstances, and providing a very significant degree of resilience in emergency situations as well. But I will ask Mr Chisholm to directly address your question.
Yeah, and thank you, Senator, for the question. It is, as the Minister said, a very exciting development in the government signalling to the market that it is prepared to support the deployment of new satellite technology to achieve much greater coverage and support across a country such as Australia. As you know, at the moment, as part of the fixed system we have, it's only about 30% of the landmass that's covered. The large phased array effect of LEOSAT's technology means that we can achieve much more coverage in support of things like universal service obligations, but also broader connectivity. One of the really interesting examples of how we saw this deployed recently was during the Los Angeles fires, and the role that Starlink played with T-Mobile to ensure that a large number of people were able to communicate with each other and with emergency services professionals in a way that they wouldn't have been able to with the existing system. So the universal outdoor mobile obligation will be a very significant signal to the market that the government is supporting that technology. We want to see that market develop. We'll work closely with industry to achieve that outcome. And on the question of the actual numbers and the coverage, I'll ask the officials to step through that. But we're really delighted to finally see this one announced.
Lisa Lorans, First Assistant Secretary, Communications Infrastructure Division. The almost bit relates to you still need to be able to essentially see the sky. Yep. So if you're inside a building, cave. But if you go out to the front of the cave, you should be able to get the coverage in places like out in national parks, or, as Mr Chisholm said, the vast areas of Australia where you're currently in between mobile phone towers.
So it doesn't need to be mapped because it's everywhere where you can see the sky. Is that right?
I'm sorry, can you repeat
It doesn't need to be mapped because it's everywhere you can see the sky?
That's right.
Okay. With the previous USOs, a lot of it on mobile coverage was to make sure telcos fix the towers that go out quickly and have this. Is that going to be wound back at all? Because unintended consequences of 3G have been there. There's no intent to wind back that regard?
No.
Okay.
It supports, there's definitely a role for both in the Australian landscape. And, for example, the LEOSATs, the services available to it will grow over time. So to start with, it's SMS, then voice, then data. So it will really bridge that gap where you don't currently have connectivity.
Okay. Getting to that point, a telco that I spoke to this morning on this said there was no technical liaison or consultation with them until last week on how this would happen. So what did the department do to great intent. There's no question here. What certainty do we have that a 2025 legislation, 2027 rollout is achievable?
Yeah, so Senator, we do work with industry on the broader series of policy questions related to the future of LEO SATS technology. I chair a working group with industry and experts and government representatives on LEO SATS. We provided a report to government late 2023, and it highlighted a number of the areas for action for government and to which this relates, and also the RTIRC, the Regional Telecommunications Review report that was released just before Christmas, from memory. Yep. Pointed to this work as an important contribution to achieving the connectivity outcomes that Ms Lorance stepped through. So we have had extensive consultation with communities through the RTIRC.
No, but
and industry as part of the LEO SATS working group. One of the issues to be aware of in this context is that each of the telecommunications companies has their own commercial relationships, and it's therefore really important that we bear that in mind when we talk to them about future government announcements, because they need to think about that in the context of their own negotiations, for example, Optus with Starlink. And so we will work closely with them as the policy is rolled out and implemented over the coming 18 months to 2 years.
Okay, as it goes forward. But I imagine, you mentioned Starlink. They seem to be the only full coverage LEO SATs at the moment. I imagine I might be putting word in Senator Hanson-Young's. She would be thrilled to have all the conversations carried over Elon Musk's network. From that perspective, are we driving under this obligation, commercial realities of all our telcos to do business with one organisation at the moment? I know there's plans under NBN there's been speaking about their own LEOs, but they won't be ready by 2027. Are we driving everyone into one organisation, one monopoly at the moment with this policy?
No, Senator. In fact, I'd say it's the opposite, because by the government signalling that it wants to see a universal outdoor mobile obligation, it's sending a strong signal to the market that it also wants to see competition and wants to see other entrants playing a role. There are European participants in the market. As you mentioned, there are other companies, both American and non-North American, that are emerging in the LEOSAT context. If the government didn't commit to a policy framework like this, we would likely see incumbents continue to do well, which is fine, but we also want to see new entrants, and hence the government is getting ahead of the curve in terms of the new technology in a way that's something of a world first, I think.
Well, you say world first. You mentioned about direct-to-device technology. Has there been any live trials of direct-to-device technology in Australia?
We are doing trials. Yeah, would you like to? Yeah.
Sorry?
Yeah. Not currently of direct-to-device. We are undertaking some independent LEOSAT-based voice trials currently, which has informed some of the universal mobile coverage work, but certainly there's a lot of experience internationally which we've been drawing.
But none in Australia. We have announced this in a press release today, that this is only possible thanks to LEOSAT and direct-to-device, but there are no trials to date of direct-to-device that have happened in Australia.
So can we... Sorry, Senator, Lisa Lorance. If I can just add to that, there's the two different elements to the LEOSATs. LEOSATs are a newer technology. We do have the voice trials underway to understand how that's working in practice. As Mr Chisholm said, we do have a working group where we are working with providers and understanding the lived experience. We can talk more about the experience for the fires in the US.
I looked at that. I want to know about the trials on technical because, as I said, good intent, but when industry's saying they only found out about this last week, when there's been no trials of the ability to deliver what is promised, it looks a little bit like Optus had made their own announcements, Telstra had made their own announcements. Are we just jumping on something without having a look? Has there been a feasibility study on the business case, for example, of when Mr Chisholm mentions there might be other players in LEOSATs? Do we have any reality that we'll have full coverage of a LEOSAT from any competitor to Starlink by 2027 when these comes in? Is that study been done?
So I think that the intention of announcing that we are bringing in the universal outdoor mobile obligation with sufficient time to be working with the mobile network operators on how it will work in practice. The government is also working with the sector to understand the technology, where it's up to, and to broaden the market. As you said, there is one player that is demonstrating in other locations that the technology works. This is about making sure that it's accessible to all Australians wherever you are.
Okay, but we haven't done the technical studies of one aspect of it. We haven't engaged with industry until last week on it, and we haven't done cost impacts of it.
Yeah. So
what's the announcement here? Something we'd like to see.
The announcement sends a very clear signal to the market that we want to see D2D services delivered in Australia. It's really important, whether you're talking about telecommunications or you're talking about energy or you're talking about other infrastructure, that you get very clear signals from government about what it wants to see, and that government is keen to support and work in partnership with the sector on that. And there are both broader incentives and the incentive underpinning this framework to encourage that. There are other entrants and competitors that are emerging in relation to D2D, including Link, which has an agreement in place with TPG and other companies such as AST Space Mobile. So that's really exciting, and the policy will send that clear signal, and we will be working closely with industry to deploy the technology in the future.
I get that, but
I need to rotate the
last
call.
question there, Chair.
Question.
Given the Minister's recently raised some problems around sovereignty issues for LeoSats here, and you can't name one LeoSat business other than Starlink that will have full coverage by the time this USO comes in, what's going on here? Are we...
Starlink is already providing services in Australia. Consumers have voted with their feet in relation to Starlink. That's had very significant uptake.
I'm a
it's
Starlink
very popular,
I don't have
including in regional communities and remote communities who rely on Starlink for connectivity. Starlink also played a really valuable role, as we highlighted, in the context of natural disasters in North America. We want to encourage all of the above. We're keen to see Starlink continue to play that role. We're also keen to see other competitors in the market. So, as I say, this is the government getting ahead of the curve and encouraging that competition and that innovation to the benefit of all Australians.
Well, I'm sure Senator Young will ask me questions about Trump. Maybe did President Trump phone up and say, give Elon all your business? So we'll hear if that's questions the next one.
Thank you, Senator Cadell. I might just have one quick follow-up before we go to Senator Hanson-Young. I was going to ask a series of questions, but Senator Cadell has covered most of them. I'm particularly interested in what advantage this will provide in natural disasters. I understand a similar technology was used in the LA fires. Could you just expand a little on that for us so we can see what the potential might be? Given, like, I know we've had a lot of challenges where we've had disasters, natural disasters in Australia where no one has any mobile coverage.
And just to preface it, and Ms. Lawrence or Ms. Power can speak to it at further length, but what you saw in LA with D2D is that it enabled people to communicate with each other who would have otherwise been disconnected during a natural disaster. So terrestrial services are frequently disrupted because of fires or other extreme events. And you saw T-Mobile, in partnership with Starlink, enable a D2D service for the greater Los Angeles area and for those devastating wildfires. The user experience during the disaster signalled that texts were made and received by standard unmodified 4G, LTE and 5G services. And then a week after the direct-to-device service was turned on, in response to the fires, Starlink reported that over 120,000 texts had been sent and received. And on 16th of January, T-Mobile posted on their support page that around 96,000 texts had been sent and received since the service was turned on. So what you're seeing in these examples is that, but for the deployment of that technology, that's thousands and thousands of texts and communications that would not have happened. And and then enable emergency services and family and loved ones to connect with people impacted by disasters. Hence, reinforcing the point that we've made this morning that this sort of technology is vital for the future support to communities. Not only just improves connectivity generally, but during natural disasters and in countries like Australia, where we obviously look very closely at natural disasters in the US, we share similar climatic challenges and work in partnership with jurisdictions there. We're keen to see that technology work to full effect here as well.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And can you assure us that this won't end up as some form of Elon Musk monopoly?
So again, Senator, that's why the government is signalling that it wants to see a fully developed market underpinned by strong government policy and the obligation. We are seeing LeoSat entrants continue to develop. I mentioned a couple of them earlier. Companies like Amazon are also deploying that technology or building it. We are focused on ensuring support and connectivity for affected communities, whether it's Starlink or other competitors. That's really important for the government. And again, all good policy requires strong signals from government about how it wants to see markets developed and shaped. What we've seen in other contexts, including in the communications and media environment, I would say, Senator, is that you don't see optimal outcomes when you see government trying to catch up to the technology. When the technology takes off in ways that is more rapid than government has been on top of it, you see less beneficial outcomes. So this is a great example of the government getting ahead of the curve.
Okay, so this is a signal for people to come on down?
Absolutely. Yep.
Okay.
Yep. And in law, it'll be a legislated requirement, which is the strongest signal you can get.
Thank you. Senator Hanson-Young.
Thank you. Just continuing on this announcement today, could I just understand, or could you help me please understand how the incentive money will flow in terms of if a provider, Telstra or Optus, how much money is from the Australian taxpayers being spent on making sure these universal services are delivered?
Yeah, so we can talk about current funding for universal service obligations. So I might ask...
in terms of outdoor, we're talking about outdoor.
I'll just ask Ms Power to speak to current funding arrangements, and then we can step through the future plans for universal outdoor.
Hello, Nicole Power, Assistant Secretary, Universal Services Branch. So the current arrangements that apply to universal services don't include mobile services, so there is currently no funding being applied to it. Current arrangements are with Telstra currently, who is the designated universal service provider, but it has an obligation only to provide landline services and also payphones. So they receive funding under a contract with the Australian Government currently of $270 million per year for those two levels of services.
$270 million?
Yes, that's correct.
So 230 for landlines and 40 million for the payphones?
That's correct.
Okay, we're operating on the same figures. That's good. So what will be the money put aside for this new expanded outdoor incentive?
Senator, those details will be worked through with government and industry.
What would you expect this to cost?
We're not going to get into that now.
Hang on. What? So the government's announced that they're going to do something, but they haven't said how much it's going to cost or how they're going...
Senator, that's a matter for future budget consideration by the government. The policy is set and it will be funded and supported as appropriate.
Have you done any cost analysis as to how much this would cost to get this done properly?
We've done some analysis to support the policy, and we monitor both the technology and the likely costs of the technology.
What would the likely cost be?
So, Senator, just to provide a bit of broader context, as the government goes about supporting this work, we will want to ensure that we are communicating with industry in a way whereby we're also focusing on best value for money for the taxpayer. Hence, I think those details will be considered by government at the appropriate time.
So if payphones cost the Australian taxpayer, if the payphone obligation incentive costs the Australian taxpayer $40 million, how much should we be expecting the Australian taxpayer to fund so that people can use Elon Musk's Starlink?
So, Senator...
That mischaracterises the policy.
Well, unless you tell me, Minister, you've made an announcement without any figures.
Order.
May I finish an answer?
Minister, please finish your answer.
Senator, your question misunderstands the advice that's been provided into the committee so far, which is that the government's purpose is to ensure that we do have a fully developed market, and that is the purpose of the announcement, is to signal very clearly the government's intention to develop this market and to work with industry to ensure that it is fleshed out. So to the extent that your question asserts that the government policy is intended to support monopoly provision, that is simply incorrect and in fact is the exact opposite of the policy intent of the initiative that's been announced.
Okay. How do you provide a signal without providing a funding figure? Who's going to? I mean, if this is about sending a signal to the market, surely you need to tell the market what type of money is on the table.
Well, Senator, I think...
Or you just think people just make it up?
Sorry, Senator, did you want me to answer the question or not?
Well, if you have the answer, Minister, otherwise perhaps the Deputy Secretary.
I think what's been made very clear is that the government wants a policy intent to ensure that we catch up universal service obligations to match the current technology in communications. This is an area that was sorely neglected during the previous government. Nothing happened. Considerable work has been undertaken, and we've canvassed this at this estimates previously to work around the emerging technologies in LeoSat, and Mr Chisholm has already referred you to the working group that he is involved in. There has also, of course, been a review of regional communications, which we've worked with consumers to understand their requirements. This is the next step in this process. It's making it clear our expectations about the shape of the market going forward and the fact that there will be a role for government in shaping it. And Mr Chisholm can talk to you about how we now intend to work with industry to implement that, but it's really important that we do send this signal to industry. Well, there is a role for government.
I'm not discounting that,
right.
But I think unless you give some indication as to how much it's going to cost, the only player in the game is Elon Musk.
Well, Senator, I think you misunderstand again the evidence that's before you, which is that the policy intent is to ensure that we are bringing all of the players to the table.
Yeah.
With an imaginary amount of money.
That's your assertion, Senator.
Well, you've made an announcement. You're saying this sends a strong signal, but there's no dollar figure attached and you won't tell us. So either you have the dollar figure and you're hiding it, right, or you haven't got it and you haven't done your homework.
Neither of those things are correct characterisations of what is happening.
Senator Hanson-Young, maybe ask questions.
Well,
berating the witnesses in this manner
is not
going to bode well for the day.
Could I ask whether there's been any sovereign risk analysis done by the department in relation to this announcement?
What do you mean by sovereign risk?
Well, thinking about if Starlink is the only company US owned, what does that mean if somebody, Elon Musk, somebody else, I don't know, decides that that's not a service to be offered to Australia?
So, Senator, we've done quite extensive analysis of the market, and we work with industry, including through avenues such as the working group. on market development. LeoSat technology, including Starlink, plays a really important role in that context, and we welcome Starlink's participation in this technology and in these markets, and we also welcome other entrants, which is why the policy is sending that clear signal. And it's important to bear in mind this is part of a broader suite of universal services reforms that the government is committed to, and that is all being considered in that context. So we are focused on the technology and its benefits, and that's where the policy's heading.
Just for clarity's sake, what's the name of the working group?
It's the LeoSats working group. I think it's literally that.
And is there a list of people on that working group that we can have tabled?
Yes.
That would be helpful. I don't need it now, but if you could table it, that would be helpful. Thank you. Could I ask whether there's been any analysis or risk report done in relation to possible foreign interference in relation to this technology?
I think those questions are probably a matter for Home Affairs.
No. This is a matter for your minister and your department. Before making this announcement, before deciding on this policy, was there a foreign interference risk assessment?
Again, Senator, I think questions that relate to what you're asking are dealt with in other portfolios.
Do you know whether the minister has sought advice from the Home Affairs Department in relation to this policy?
The policy was part of Cabinet consideration.
Do you know whether ASIO, ASIS or ASD were asked for their advice or assistance in relation to working out the impacts and risks of foreign interference with this technology and this announcement?
So again, Senator, the policy went through a Cabinet process, and questions relating to intelligence and security are best directed to other portfolios.
Did you help design this announcement or policy, Mr Chisholm?
Yes.
So on the checklist of things to do, did anyone in your department say, we better go and ask ASIS whether there's any impact here, or can we flick this over to Home Affairs for them to have a look at, or was it announced in isolation?
So, Senator, we talk about this in estimates frequently. The Cabinet process covers...
I'm not asking about Cabinet. I'm asking about the work that the department has done.
The policy went through an extensive Cabinet development process, and that includes consultation with all affected and relevant agencies.
So has your department had any interaction or discussion or briefing from anyone in Home Affairs?
We talk to Home Affairs frequently.
In relation to this issue?
We talk to Home Affairs in relation to LeoSats. We talk to them in relation to cyber risks. We talk to them in relation to critical infrastructure security, but they are Home Affairs portfolio responsibilities.
That. But you've developed this policy. Was it on somebody's checklist in your department to see if there was a foreign interference risk?
Senator, I think that the official has answered your question. He has indicated to you that this was the subject of the ordinary processes of Cabinet, and that in and of itself, by its nature, involves consultation with other agencies.
Were there any red flags raised?
Well, we don't go to the nature of discussions of Cabinet, and you know that.
I'm not asking about Cabinet. I'm asking about the departmental development of this policy.
Senator, I'm not going into...
surely that was done before it went to Cabinet.
We're not going to Cabinet deliberations of the policy.
I'm not asking about Cabinet. I'm asking about the work that your department has done on this particular project.
I wonder if we will rotate the call because we are up in terms of time. Mr Chisholm, if you have any further information, perhaps you could provide it on notice in terms of what engagement you've had regarding this particular program. We'll go to Senator Davey.
Thank you. And, I mean, on the surface, someone who lives downtown Conago, by the Conago International Airport, I would normally be very excited about an announcement like this, but given it's uncosted, unplanned, unfunded, and there are so many questions, forgive me for being cynical. You know, we were promised that NBN would make internet access equivalent right around Australia, yet people in regional areas are paying up to 3 times more than their urban counterparts just to access speeds that are not
Take a bit of
equivalent.
responsibility for that one.
The NBN was a Labor government policy, Chair.
10 years of you lot, and look what happened.
No.
Chair.
It was
Please,
us
Senator
who
Davey,
actually realised the
please continue
NBN
your
needed to
questions.
get to the regions. But anyway, just coming back to Senator Hanson-Young's questions about sovereign risk, in the 2024 Regional Telecommunications Review, which was headed up by former Labor MP Alana McTiernan, who did a good job. That report flagged that LEOSat constellations are owned and operated by foreign companies, quote, raising questions about data security and control over sovereign risks. So she's flagged in a report that's publicly available potential sovereign risks of LEOSat. She also went on ABC Radio on January 14th and said, it does, quote, it does obviously raise issues of sovereign risk when the proprietor is a person that is seeking to have major political power around the world. Yet you've got this announcement today, and I thought Senator Hanson-Young's question was quite reasonable. Were these issues that were raised in the Regional Telecommunications Review flagged at all prior to this announcement?
Thanks for the question, Senator Davey. It had a long preamble, and I will make the point that this government is actually acting to deal with the problems we inherited in relation to the NBN. And I agree with you that communities were let down by the previous government's approach to the NBN. Their completely failed reliance on a multi-technology mix, on the old copper network, was a catastrophe. And we are making very substantial investments to resolve that and to make sure that the promise of the NBN is actually fulfilled, because it was handled incredibly badly by the previous Liberal and National government.
We inherited an NBN. We inherited an NBN solely focused on delivering for urban areas. So,
Senator
we are now
Davey,
talking about
I think
a
Let's
mobile.
just have a little bit of order.
I did
Senator Davey,
indicate-
you've asked a question. Let the Minister answer.
I was asking about sovereign risk.
Well, Senator Davey, I'm just addressing all of the matters that you raised in your question, the first of which was the NBN. The second one, you did ask about sovereign risk, and again, as I indicated to Senator Hanson-Young, I think you are perhaps not yet grappling with the information that officials are putting in front of you, which is that the purpose of the announcement today and the work that the government is doing on universal service obligations more generally is to make sure that we have the policies in place to support the development of this market. Now, Mr Chisholm can talk to you about a number of things. I think it may be helpful if he does talk to you about the market information that we do have about current and likely participants in this market. But it's also the case that this is the beginning of working with industry, as he's already signalled to you, to understand how we will ensure that this market is fleshed out appropriately. Mr Chisholm.
Thank you, Minister. And
can I just clarify, though, Minister, you said the announcement of the policy was to send a signal, and yet in the reports about the policy it says the intent is to introduce new laws. So it's not just a signal, it's legislation that will require telcos to offer LEOSat solutions.
Senator, the legislation is important because it provides a very clear incentive to see the technology deployed in support of the connectivity issues that we outlined at length before. So legislation will play an important role. It's probably the best way you can provide certainty to a market is to legislate it, because it's law and it needs to be provided. The government has also signalled that it will be prepared to partner with industry to see that technology rolled out, whether that's financial or in addressing other regulatory or barriers, related barriers, which goes to the work of the working group. The report that we provided to government a year ago goes into some detail about a range of regulatory and related issues that need to be tackled to help support LEOSAT deployment. But again, no one thinks that this will not be a really critical piece of the technology solution for the future, particularly in relation to natural disasters, but also broadening connectivity in areas that are currently underserved. So there are other, as the Minister said, there are other entrants into the market. We are really keen to see them encouraged and to grow, both in Australia and with our partners, and the policy is focused on that.
Now, you've mentioned natural disasters. Senator Grogan mentioned natural disasters. It's a very crucial topic, and as Senator McAllister, the Minister, is very, very well aware, crucial. We have been talking about the need for a public safety mobile broadband network for around 9 years. The Coalition provided funding for it. This government has continued funding for it. There is a task force working on it. My understanding, when I get briefings on it, is one of the roadblocks is there is no single-use technology yet. Will this universal outdoor mobile obligation negate the need for a public safety mobile broadband network, given you are saying that it will play an important role in natural disasters, and yet there is no single-use technology available?
I'll ask Ms Lorenz to speak to that. Yeah.
Thanks, Senator. Can I just clarify that LEOSATs aren't intended to replace existing technology, including mobile infrastructure? It's supplementing it.
Yes.
It is also supplementing the other initiatives that are underway to strengthen Australia's capacity to communicate in times of disaster and emergency, and more broadly.
So can I also understand, as a regional customer, and who will bear the cost? It's uncosted. You say you'll partner with industry. You don't know what the incentives to industry will look like, whether it will be a financial incentive or in-kind or a like incentive. As a regional customer who is more likely to be dependent on LEOSATs or LEOSAT facilitated communications than someone who lives in Sydney with a 5G antenna on every street corner, am I going to be paying more for the privilege of that service in the regions because there'll be an extra cost every time you connect to a satellite? I mean, this is the sort of questions that people out there will be asking that I don't. From your answers today, I'm getting the feeling that there's no work been done on that yet.
So, Senator, that is part. So, firstly, as Mr. Chisholm said, this is part of a broader review of the universal service obligations. There are two discussion papers which are up on our website. One is looking at the financing arrangements that sit around USO reform, and looking at the mobile element. We're looking at those structures more broadly, flagging that the government is willing to incentivise where necessary, and having some runway between now and when this will come into effect. It is about working with industry. Industry currently covers a lot of the costs for the commercial benefit, I guess, commercial interaction. This is about understanding if there are barriers to entry, going to Senator Hanson-Young's point about having a market that involves more than one player and then being able to address those barriers. So it's first understanding what the barriers to entry are, and there is already funding that is dedicated to universal service obligations. It's about whether we are structuring that in the way that meets the needs of people.
And we keep hearing that there are more than one players. We've all heard about Starlink. Can you give me the names of other potential players? The name of one other LeoSat provider that might or might not participate?
So we're monitoring the market closely, Senator. There are competitors, including Link, LYNK. It has an agreement with TPG and other companies such as AST Space Mobile, and they've trialled D2D capability. I referenced earlier Amazon's Kuiper project, which is in development now as well. But I'll ask the team if they wish to speak further on that.
Mr. Chisholm, I think that you've covered all the main players. Obviously, there's Apple iPhone uses Globalstar LeoSat constellations to make emergency SMS. So there definitely are alternative players emerging in the market.
We expect to continue to see more of that, given just how successful the technology has been. Starlink is obviously at the forefront of the market at this time, but the market is developing really quickly, and I expect to see more of that over time.
Which does beg the question. Telstra have made an announcement that they're trialling this sort of technology, as has Optus. So why is the government intervening in what the market is doing anyway?
We want to see an orderly transition of this technology to support consumers and as part of the Universal Services reform framework. I mean, this is about as critical to the role of government in telecommunications as you can get. The Commonwealth is responsible for communications. For the Commonwealth to just sit back and allow all this to happen without clear signals, regulation, commitments to work with industry, I anticipate we would see very messy transitions taking place, and we would also see likely a single player dominate the market. That is why we want a strong policy framework in place to encourage the new entrants, the competition, the market development, and a focus on keeping it in the context of universal services.
So you want to prevent a single player?
Last question, Senator.
We want to see a strong market develop.
So last question. We saw with the closure of 3G, people all around the country having to upgrade their devices. Will that be the case? And particularly if I've got an Apple which uses Globalstar, but the LeoSats might not be Globalstar, or are people going to be obliged to upgrade to access this universal mobiles, or is it going to be streamlined? Because, again, the concern is what the cost will be to the end consumer, and you've not been able to enunciate that at all. If Telstra and Optus are forced down this path, will they pass on the cost to their consumers, and will consumers have to go out and buy new phones?
So it is really important, as you say, Senator, for people to know which devices are able to access D2D services. So we'll work closely with ACMA to ensure there's clear information on that. We're also,
but the answer is potentially.
We're also involved in a funding device testing processes, and that is work that ACMA is involved in to get a better sense of the device capability. But over time, as mobile phones continue to be developed and roll out, we're going to see greater use of this technology. So, but yes, as with 3G, and I might add, 3G was, when we commenced that process, well, certainly when Minister Rowland inherited responsibility for that process, there was not an orderly transition process in place. New regulations have been put in place to mandate 000 compliance for mobile phones. A device testing regime has been put in place to work with industry and with manufacturers. Because we want to see...
Senator, we're going to rotate you.
Because we want to see that orderly transition happen, and hence
potential.
that's the same with these technologies, which is that government has a critical role to play.
Which actually makes the case for the framework that's been announced. We actually do need a measure of coordination across all of the elements of the supply chain in the context of the universal service obligation.
Thank you.